There are moments in a person's life that arrive without warning, not as metaphors, not as lessons wrapped in silk, but as pure, cold fact. The pavement, the rain, the body that finally says, enough. Addie's Okafor had been carrying too much for too long, and on a Tuesday evening in October, in the middle of Via Monte Napoleone, her body simply stopped negotiating. She didn't fall dramatically. There was no cinematic collapse, no slow motion. One moment she was walking, heels on wet stone, portfolio case digging into her shoulder, mascara doing its quiet job of refusing to survive the weather, and the next moment her knees were on the ground and the ground was cold, and the rain was not stopping for anyone. She was 34 years old. She was a black woman in Milan. She was a freelance art director with 14 years of work in her portfolio and a rejection letter she hadn't opened yet, still sitting in her inbox like an accusation. She had €312 in her account. She had a flight back to London in 4 days that she wasn't sure she could afford to rebook if this trip didn't work out. And right now, none of that mattered, because her vision was blurring at the edges and her hands were flat on the pavement, and the city was moving around her like she was furniture. People passed, not because they were cruel. People in cities pass things they don't understand. A woman on the ground in the rain is either a problem or a scene, and most people have already decided they don't have time for either. Then a coat landed on her shoulders. It was heavy. Wool, she thought, the kind of weight that doesn't apologize for itself. Dark charcoal, impeccably cut. And a man crouched beside her, not standing above her, not extending a cautious hand from a safe distance. Crouched, knees on the same wet pavement, his Italian leather shoes getting ruined without any apparent concern. "Stai bene?" he asked first. Then, reading something in her face, "Are you all right?" His English had an accent that was architecture, something built carefully over years. He was perhaps 40, maybe a year or two beyond that, with dark hair starting to silver at the temples and eyes that were doing the thing eyes do when they are genuinely trying to assess a situation rather than perform concern. Thaddeus opened her mouth to say yes. It was automatic. 14 years of being the only one in the room, the only one who looked like her in the meeting, the only one whose accent made certain people's faces arrange themselves into patience. 14 years of that had made yes automatic. "No," she said instead, and it surprised her more than it surprised him. If you've ever watched someone decide in real time to be honest about their own suffering, subscribe to this channel. Stay with this story. Because what happens next changes everything for both of them, and it begins right here, in the rain, with a single, honest word. His name was Luca Ferrante. She didn't know that yet. She knew his coat was warm and smelled like cedar and something she couldn't name. She knew his hands were careful when they helped her to her feet. Not performative, not the hands of a man making a gesture, but the hands of someone who was actually paying attention to where she was unsteady. She knew that he didn't ask her what happened or tell her she'd be fine. He asked if she could walk. When she said she thought so, he said there was a cafe 3 doors down and that it was warm and that she didn't have to explain anything. The cafe was called Piccolo Blue. It was the kind of place that existed in gaps between the city's ambition. Small tables, amber light. A woman behind the counter who called Luca by name and brought 2 espressos and a glass of water without being asked. Fraise wrapped both hands around the espresso. The warmth moved through her palms and into her chest, like something she had forgotten was possible. "You don't have to tell me anything," Luca said again, across the small table. He had left his coat around her shoulders. He was in a charcoal suit and seemed entirely unbothered by this arrangement. "I know," she said. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. That was the first strange thing. She had sat across from men in boardrooms all week, men who made the silence in rooms into a form of pressure, a technique for making you speak before you were ready. This silence was different. It had the quality of space. "I fainted," she said eventually. "I haven't eaten properly today, or slept properly in 4 days." "Why?" She looked at him. It was a direct question. Not intrusive, direct. There's a difference, though it takes a specific kind of confidence to deliver it correctly. "I had a pitch," she said. "A big one. I've been working on the concept for 3 months. I flew here from London for a 40-minute meeting. How did it go?" Adaze laughed. It came out darker than she intended. They kept me waiting for 25 minutes. Then 3 people in the meeting spent most of it looking at their phones. Then the creative director said the concept was interesting but not quite aligned with their vision. Then she thanked me for my time. She paused. I've heard that phrase 100 times. It always means the same thing. Luca was quiet. He turned his espresso cup once in its saucer. Which company? Ferrante Group. Something shifted in his expression. It was small, a compression at the corners of his eyes, a breath that didn't quite complete itself. But she caught it, because Adaze Okafor had spent her career in rooms where she had to read 10 signals at once just to know where she stood. I see, he said. She didn't know yet what she was looking at. She would know soon. But at that moment the name had not connected. The coat had not connected. The face she had seen only in industry articles had not connected, because she had been running on empty for 4 days and her brain was conserving what it had. She ordered a panino. He ordered nothing, but he stayed. She told him. And she wasn't sure why, except that the rain outside made the cafe feel like a parenthesis in the city's logic, a space where the normal rules of guardedness didn't apply. She told him about the concept, not everything, but the core of it, a campaign she had designed for a heritage fashion house that wanted to enter a new market, a visual language that drew on West African textile traditions, not as appropriation, not as decoration, but as structural logic. The geometry of kente not as surface pattern, but as the actual architecture of how the brand's new visual identity would be organized, how it would move across platforms, how it would feel. It's not a mood board, she said. It's a system, a living system that could grow. I showed them the expansion logic. I showed them the grid. I showed them how it would adapt for print, for digital, for retail space. Luca was very still. What did they say about the system specifically? He asked. They didn't. They said it was interesting but not aligned. She pressed her lips together. Which is fine. Rejection is part of the job. I've been rejected before. She looked out at the rain. It just never gets easier when you know the work is good. Here is what Adaze did not know at that moment. 3 weeks earlier, Luca Ferrante had been shown a preliminary framework for a new campaign direction by his creative director, Elena Marchetti. He had been told it was developed internally. He had thought it was elegant in a way that their in-house team didn't usually produce, a structural elegance, a logic to it that felt sourced from somewhere specific. He had asked Elena twice where the concept originated. She had told him it evolved from the team's research. He had believed her because there was no reason not to. He was beginning to understand that there was a reason. That night, Luca Ferrante went back to his office, because Luca Ferrante was the kind of man who went back to his office at 9 in the evening when something was sitting wrong in his chest. And he pulled up the preliminary framework file. He looked at the metadata. He looked at the revision history. He looked at the earliest version, which had come in as an external submission, tagged and date-stamped with a name on it. Adaze Okafor, submitted 6 weeks ago, marked, reviewed, and declined. He sat with that for a long time. Then he called Elena Marchetti. The call lasted 11 minutes. By the end of it, he knew what had happened. A freelance submission, unusual in its approach, compelling enough that Elena had held on to it, had not declined it, had built from it, had told no one, had presented it as the team's own development, and received the corresponding praise and the green light for the next quarter's campaign. Luca Ferrante had built his company on a number of things, but one of them, the one he was most privately proud of, was that he had never taken from someone who couldn't afford to lose it. He made 2 more calls. Then he went home. Then he lay awake until 3 in the morning, which was unusual for him. He was trying to determine the right shape for what came next. Meanwhile, Adaze was in a small hotel near Porta Venezia, sitting on the edge of the bed with her laptop open, finally reading the rejection email. It was polite. It was brief. It used the phrase, "not the right fit," and thanked her for the opportunity to review the work. She closed the laptop. She had been here before. Not this specific version of it, but this feeling. The feeling of having given something true and having it handed back in a form that made it seem like the problem was hers. The feeling of being told, in the language of professional courtesy, that she did not belong here. She had grown up in Lagos, moved to London at 17, built a career in spaces that were not designed with her in mind. She had sat in rooms where she was the only person who looked like her, and had learned, too well, she sometimes thought, how to make herself palatable, how to present her work in a register that would be legible to people who weren't expecting anything from her. She had made herself smaller, not because she believed she was small, but because she had learned that being big in certain rooms cost too much. The cost was measured in contracts not offered, in emails not returned, in meetings where she was interrupted 6 times and noticed that the man beside her was not. She was tired. Not just tonight, tired. Tired in the way that runs all the way through. But the work was good. She knew the work was good. That certainty was the thing she held on to. It was the only thing that couldn't be taken from her. Or so she thought. The next morning she received an email. The sender was Luca Ferrante. The subject line was simply, "Your work." She read it 3 times. He had written, "I am the CEO of Ferrante Group. I believe we met briefly last night, though I did not introduce myself properly, which was an omission I am choosing to correct now, along with a larger one. I am asking if you would be willing to meet with me this morning. Not a pitch meeting, a conversation. I owe you at minimum that." She sat with the email for 45 minutes. She almost didn't go. That is the part that matters, and the part that's easy to skip over in favor of the dramatic version. She almost didn't go because she had been doing this for 14 years, and she had learned that when powerful men expressed regret, it often looked exactly like an opportunity they wanted to take from you in a different way. She almost didn't go because her flight was in 3 days, and she had a studio apartment in Hackney, and a client in Bristol who owed her an invoice and a life to get back to. She almost didn't go because the version of herself that had collapsed on the pavement of Via Monte Napoleone was still very close to the surface, and she wasn't sure she had the structural integrity for another meeting that went wrong. She went because the work was good, and she knew it, and because if she didn't go, she would always wonder. If you've ever made yourself show up when everything in you wanted to disappear, you know exactly what it took her to walk into that building. The Ferrante Group occupied 4 floors of a building near Brera, all stone exterior and light-filled interior, the kind of architecture that announces itself without shouting. She was shown to a conference room on the top floor that had 1 wall of windows and a table she could have laid down on without touching the ends. Luca Ferrante was already there, standing, when she arrived. He was wearing the coat, the same coat cleaned and pressed, draped over a chair. He gestured toward it as she came in. "I thought you might want to return it yourself," he said, "or keep it. Either is fine." It was such a specific thing to say that it briefly disarmed her. He didn't make her wait for the explanation. He sat across from her, same thing he'd done in the cafe, no performative distance, and he told her everything. What he had found in the files, what Elena had done, what the timeline looked like. He slid a printed document across the table, the metadata report, the submission record, the date stamps. Adais looked at the documents. She was very quiet. "The campaign goes to production in 3 weeks," he said. "It is based substantially on your system, your visual architecture, your grid logic." He paused. "That is not a situation I am willing to proceed with." "What does that mean, practically?" she asked. "It means I am stopping the current production timeline. It means Elena Marchetti no longer holds her position at this company as of this morning." He said it plainly, without drama. "And it means I am asking you, if you are willing, and I understand entirely if you are not, to come on board to lead the creative direction of the campaign that is, by right, yours." Adais looked at him for a long moment. "You could have handled this internally," she said. "You could have restructured the concept enough to create distance from my original submission and moved forward. I would never have known with certainty." "Yes," he said. "Why didn't you?" He looked at the window, then back at her. "Because I've spent 15 years building something that is supposed to mean something, and I'm not willing to have it mean this." There was a silence that was not small. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course." She stood, gathered her portfolio case, then she stopped. "The woman in the meeting yesterday, The one who told me it wasn't aligned with their vision. That was Elena Marchetti. Yes. Adaeze nodded slowly, as if something was settling into place. She knew who I was. She knew what she was sitting across from. She wasn't saying it with anger exactly. She was saying it with the precision of someone who had suspected something and was now watching it be confirmed. Yes, Luca said again, and she looked at me and said thank you for your time. He didn't look away. Yes. She left without giving him an answer. She walked out into the Milanese morning, which had cleared overnight into the kind of cold brilliance that feels like the city showing off, and she walked for a long time through Brera's narrow streets, past the bookshops and the small galleries, and the market with its noise and colour, and she let herself feel it, the full weight of what had been done, and the unexpected shape of what was being offered. What Elena Marchetti had taken from her was not just credit, it was the proof that the work was right, that the system functioned, that what she had built in 3 months of concentrated effort was good enough to become the backbone of a major campaign. The rejection had been designed to make her doubt that. The rejection had been designed to send her back to London with a smaller sense of herself, with the quiet, corrosive idea that maybe she had overestimated the work, maybe she didn't quite understand the market, maybe she wasn't quite aligned. That was the real theft, not the intellectual property, the confidence. She called her best friend in London. She talked for 20 minutes while sitting on a bench near the Pinacoteca di Brera, watching pigeons perform their indifferent ballet. Her friend said, "Ada, you know what the work is. You've always known." Then her friend said, "If you don't take this, I will fly to Milan and take it myself," which made Adaeze laugh, properly, fully, for the first time in 4 days. She emailed Luca Ferrante at 2 in the afternoon. She said, "I have conditions." He replied within 4 minutes, "Of course. Name them." The conditions were not small. She wanted the contract in her name, sole creative director credit, the original submission formally acknowledged in the campaign documentation, and a fee that reflected what the work was actually worth, rather than what freelancers in her position were usually offered. She wanted a clause that gave her the right to walk away if the creative direction was compromised without her sign-off. He agreed to all of it, and then began 6 weeks that Adaeze Okafor would spend in Milan, in a company that was learning to see itself differently, in rooms that she was no longer willing to make herself smaller to occupy. She brought the system to life, not the version that had been partially digested by Elena's team. Her version, the original version, the one that knew exactly why West African textile geometry was not an aesthetic choice, but a philosophical one. The grid was about how meaning moves. The Kente structure was about how pattern holds history without freezing it. She presented this to the full creative team in a 2-hour session that started with silence and ended with a senior designer from Florence asking her 11 questions in a row and taking notes like a student. Luca attended the session. He sat at the back. He did not interrupt. He took no notes. He watched. There is a particular quality of attention that is different from being watched. Being watched carries evaluation in it. You feel yourself being measured. Being attended to is different. It has the quality of someone genuinely trying to understand. Adaeze had spent 14 years being watched. She recognized slowly across the 6 weeks what it felt like to be attended to instead. He brought her coffee when she was working late. Not metaphorically. He would appear at the door of whatever room she was working in, 2 coffees, and ask if she had a few minutes to think through something. They talked about the campaign. They talked about the company's history. They talked about what fashion houses did to communities whose aesthetics they borrowed without acknowledgement, and what it would mean to do something structurally different. He was not performing interest. He was genuinely working something out. She told him once, "You know the danger of this moment is that it feels like resolution when it's actually just a beginning." "What do you mean?" "You did the right thing with me. You will have to decide over and over whether to keep doing it. With the next person, with the one after that, the system doesn't change because one case is handled correctly." He was quiet for a long time. "I know," he said. "I'm aware that awareness isn't the same as change." "Good," she said, "as long as you know." It was not a romance, though a simpler story would have made it one. It was something more durable than that. Two people who recognized something in each other, not desire, but a particular seriousness about the work, a particular unwillingness to pretend that what happened in professional spaces didn't matter, a particular insistence on seeing things clearly. The campaign launched 8 weeks after Adese Okafor walked into Luca Ferrante's building with her conditions. It ran across 60 markets. The visual system, her visual system, was described by 3 separate publications as one of the most formally rigorous creative identities to come from a heritage house in a decade. The campaign documentation, available in the press kit, listed the concept as developed by Adese Okafor, freelance creative director, with the original framework dated and attributed. Elena Marchetti's name appeared nowhere. On the day the campaign went live, Adese was back in London, in her studio in Hackney with the October light coming through the window and her cat making determined circles on her desk. She opened the press coverage. She read it quietly, alone, which was how she preferred the good moments. The same way she'd always preferred to feel the real weight of things without an audience. Then she opened a new file on her laptop and started working on the next concept. 3 months later, Ferrante Group offered her a retainer. She negotiated the terms over a video call with Luca, who had the slightly pained expression of a man who has learned that she will not accept a number that doesn't reflect the actual value, and who has made his peace with this. She accepted the retainer. She did not move to Milan. She kept her studio in Hackney, kept her independence, kept the freedom to walk away that the contract guaranteed her. What she did not keep was the old habit of smallness. That was the thing that had changed, and it was the thing nobody wrote about in the press coverage, because it was internal and invisible and personal. The way she walked into rooms now, not louder, not harder, just fuller, as if she had stopped apologizing, on a frequency too low to hear consciously, for the fact of her presence. She thought sometimes about the pavement of Via Monte Napoleone, about her hands flat on the wet stone, about the moment before the coat landed on her shoulders, that specific moment of being on the ground in the rain while the city moved around her. She had felt invisible in that moment, profoundly, exhaustingly invisible, but she had said no when she meant no, and yes when she meant yes, and the coat had been warm, and the espresso had been warm, and she had eaten the panino and told the truth about the work. And then, the next morning, she had gotten up and shown up, because the work was good and she knew it. And that knowing was the thing you carry when everything else is wet and cold and the city is not waiting for you. It is enough to know what you've made, to refuse to let someone's small cruelty redefine your understanding of it. It is, in fact, everything. If this story landed with you, if you've ever been in a room where your work was taken and your presence was managed, and your silence was mistaken for permission, share this video. Someone in your circle needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about what it looks like when someone decides they are not invisible after all, you know what to do. Subscribe. Stay close. The next story is already waiting. Adese Okafor did not need to be rescued. She needed to be seen. And eventually, on her own terms, in her own time, with her conditions named and accepted, she made sure that she was. The coat, by the way, she returned. She folded it carefully, wrapped it in brown paper and left it with a note on Luca's assistant's desk on her last day in Milan. The note said only, "Thank you for the pavement." He kept the note. That part is not in the press coverage either, but it happened.